Okay, welcome back, and do my mini review. It's not really a review, just some thoughts on the X-T4, Fuji X-T4, and had it for about 3 weeks now. I've had other Fuji cameras, X-T1, X-T2, X100, and X100S, I think an XE3. So I'm very familiar with the Fuji cameras, and a lot of these are incremental upgrades, and so I don't need lots of time to go over the camera, use it, and test it in a lot of different situations because I've already been very familiar with it. First of all, when I get one of the cameras, a new camera, I use on the LCD screen. This one's protected, so maybe don't need it as much, but I usually get the Expert Shield. It's this one's the flexible. It's just LCD protector, and it does have a lifetime warranty, and they're only about $13. But pretty easy to put on. I don't know if you can't really see it, but it goes on and fits very well. And if you take your time and do it the way you're supposed to, you won't get any bubbles. And it's just a little extra to keep from getting scratches. And they have a glass version, but I like the little flexible one. So that's that. And I'll just jump right in. It's going to be all over the place. I'm just going to go over some things that I had wrote down on some notes over here. For whatever reason, and this has happened on the other Fuji cameras I've had, I don't know why, but hold on a second. When you're doing the image review, so I've got the camera on, and you press the playback button. It takes a second or two for the image review. It's like it's parking the image stabilization, and so I just show you how long it takes. So 1001, 1000, almost 2 seconds or so. And when you press the playback button, you'll notice that it sounds like it's parking the image stabilizer, and then you get the image review. And it's just a minor annoyance. It's not a big delay. And the thing is, with my Nikon Z7 that I'm recording this with, the image review is almost instant. I don't know if there's any way they can improve that, but that's just a minor annoyance, so something to keep in mind. The other thing about these XT type cameras, the Fuji series XT, since the shutter button's up here, when you've got using the camera straps, this is the Peak Design. I usually use the Peak Design slide. It's not the really wide one. It's this one's what is it, about maybe about a little over an inch wide or something like that. So I usually use those, and I use it like a sling. I don't use it around my neck. I just kind of over my shoulder. But as you're putting your finger up to the shutter button, you can see this strap lug here kind of gets, it's a little uncomfortable and gets in the way. Again, a minor annoyance. Sometimes I'll move it up and put my finger around this way. So that's that. Get that out of the way if that bothers you. I typically prefer, now you might be thinking, well, why'd you buy this? But I'll get to that. I usually prefer like a DSLR style camera, like the Z7 that I'm recording this with. Like I said, there's a ton of pictures of that, and I have some videos from that also on YouTube. But I usually prefer that style, and with the shutter button a little further forward, so you're away from the this strap. Actually, the Nikon DF was like this too, and that kind of bothered me a little bit. This lug for the camera strap on the DF, Nikon DF DSLR, and it was kind of a similar situation. So I normally like the shutter button a little further forward, and I did add this. Again, this is the Jjc hand grip, and it fits really well. You can put a little strap in here, so you can put like a little hand grip strap or a regular neck strap. Easy access to the battery and everything, and people have said this kind of flops around, but mine doesn't. It's nice and firm, latches in there really good, and it doesn't flop around. So that's about it for the image review of the strap. Looking at my notes over here. There's one thing I've always wanted to do on the Fuji cameras. I didn't like controlling the aperture with being forced to control it by the aperture ring. So now with this, I can control it totally by the front command dial. Might be able to put it on the rear also, but I like the front for the aperture and the rear dial for exposure compensation. So you see I have the exposure compensation dial set to C, and the rear dial is my exposure compensation. So it's really quick and easy. So I've got my hands right here, my fingers right here, rear dial, super easy to change exposure compensation, and the front dial, you know, again, I'm just like right there, really easy. I think the issue I had with changing it on the ring is, you know, I'll accidentally change it, you know, as I'm moving the camera around, holding it, you know, I accidentally change it. And plus the other annoying thing is they've got f/22, you know, your smallest aperture by the automatic setting. So if you want to change it, get out of auto and switch back to a aperture manually, and you want to go to a lower aperture, you got to go all the way over here to f4. You know, again, you might think of this as a first world problem, not a big deal, but I mean, I don't know why they don't start with f4 right here, because it's all electronic. It's not like you're actually moving the aperture when you do this. So anyway, and the other thing, by the way, on the 16 to 80 f4 lens, I really like how they stiffened this up, because this is quite a bit stiffer than like the 18 to 55 aperture ring that I've used in the past and other ones. So you're not accidentally moving it too much. So what I was going to get to is how to set this, and this was not really super obvious in the past, and I think it's probably available in X-T4 and some of the other recent Fuji cameras. I don't know if it was available in the other older releases. I don't think it was, because I've never seen it. And so what it is, of course, if you want to control it by the command wheel here, if I can speak, make sure you have the aperture ring in A, and then go into your menus. I don't know if you can see this. So you go into the menus, you want to go into the setup, button and dial setting, and okay, so it's going to be aperture ring setting, which is on page 2. So 2 of 3. Hopefully this is in focus. So button dial settings in your setup menu, aperture ring setting, and you want to set it to command. So if you have it set to auto, of course, when you have the aperture ring set to auto, it's just going to, it's kind of like a P mode, you know, aperture, it's like a programmed auto. So if you have your shutter speed in auto and your aperture in auto, then it's like programmed auto. But now, you know, you can set this to command. So now when you have that set to command and you have the aperture ring set to A, now you can actually control, open that back up, if you can see it, the aperture here, down here in the bottom, right above my thumb, changing it with the command dial, front command dial, instead of the aperture ring. So that's, for me, much more convenient, and I really love that I have that option now. Let's see, what else do we have here? This has firmware version 1.02. When the first body I got, if you'd seen my original video, it was a silver body, and had a problem with that, and I'm not going to go into that too much. You can look at my older video where it would just not power on. When you turn the power button on, or the power switch on, it just would not power on. There'd be nothing on the LCD, there'd be nothing in the EVF, so you'd have to take the battery out and put it back in, and then it would power up. So I got this swapped out. They didn't have any more silver ones. Of course, now they do. A few days after I got the black one, now they have the silver ones in stock again. I like the silver version better, but I normally buy the black, so I've got a black one now anyway. So after getting it, I noticed, well, actually, right as I shipped the other one off, lo and behold, Fuji comes out with an update 1.02 firmware for the body, for the X-T4. And that one, it mentioned something about a power problem as far as not waking up from a sleep. That's where you have the power button on, and you just kind of let the camera time out and go to sleep, and then you press the shutter button, and it'll wake back up. But that's not the problem I had. The problem I had was just the camera's off, you turn it back on with a switch, it just wouldn't power on. But I bet that was kind of I bet that's the same problem. I bet that was just a firmware issue. So anyway, the camera was still within the return period. I just went ahead and exchanged it and got a brand new body, and so far I haven't had that issue with this one, and I'll probably find out next week if I have that issue again, because I'll be on vacation for a week and turn the camera off and on all day. So there's that. But what I was going to say about the 1.02 firmware, or this body and this lens all together, I don't know what changed, but I swear it focuses better, more accurately, and everything is more consistently and sharp, and what I would expect when I take a picture. On that first camera I had, I don't know if it was the firmware or what was going on with it, maybe something with the lens, but There was just too many times that it seemed like it wasn't in focus, but this one definitely does. It's, you know, it's much more accurate and consistent, and very happy with that. So that's the 1.02 firmware that's on this one right now in early July. Let's see. Yeah, and I was going to mention this Jjc Grip. It's on my notes. I've already mentioned that, but this, I think it adds a little bit, and it makes it a lot more comfortable, you know, especially if you're holding it sideways like that. It's just much more stable, easier to hold on to, and it still looks really good, and doesn't scratch up the camera or anything. It fits really well on the bottom, and I think this is kind of like an Arca Swiss type plate here if you have a Arca Swiss mount on your tripod. I usually use the Manfrotto. That's what I've got here behind me, this tripod. But if you use that, it does have that. Let's see what else. The other thing I wanted to mention about the setup menu. So you go into the menus here. I don't have much in here right now in the My menu, and what I would like to have the option to do is put like setup menu options in here, like the format, because I do use that pretty often, and just some of the other things, like if I want the button and dial setting options, but you're not able to put those in there. It's kind of limited, pretty limited to what you can actually put in the My menu, so that's why I don't really have much in here right now. You know, and there's so many other ways to control, you know, the Fuji cameras with all the external buttons. Let's see, like I have the so anyway, that was my little if you want to call it a complaint about the My menu. I wish you could put more menus in there. And don't, you know, this is not like a totally negative review. These are just a few little things that bug me, but overall, you know, I still really like the camera. It's not a big deal. Just little things that I would like to see Fuji do, you know, so I want to mention it. If be able to put more things into My menu, like the setup menu options. So they did keep the little D-pad here on the back of the camera. And there's some of the other newer Fujis, they take that out. But I definitely love having that here. So I've got the arrow to the right set up as my auto ISO, so I can easily access that. The top one is just my metering, and actually I have the front dial here on the, you know, press that. I have that set up for metering. The reason I have the front dial set up for metering, because I usually have on my cameras like Panasonic, Nikon, you can do this. You can have a press of the button on the front of the camera. You can have that be a temporary spot metering, and that's not really an option. And so I'd like Fuji to do that too. Press the front button, for example, or one of the function buttons, and have it switch to spot metering just temporarily until you take a shot, and then it exits from spot metering, goes back to matrix metering or whatever. Multi is what Fuji calls that. So anyway, I think the bottom and the left buttons I don't even have programmed, because there's so many function buttons. I just don't really use them. Actually, it was okay. The left one I do have for film simulation. I don't really use that unless it was for video, because I shoot RAW all the time, and I'm shooting RAW compressed, which seems to drop the file size by about half. So they're about 28 megabits or something like that. And when they're not compressed, it's, you know, quite a bit more. So anyway, you know, you can get into the Q menu, you can customize this. For the AF mode, I usually have it set to all. So when you go into, see the autofocus point there, I usually use single point. You just press that in, you know, the joystick here, if you didn't know this. So if you're in all, so let's get back out of that. If you're in that all mode, Q button, if you're in AF mode, all. So now you just click in on the joystick, and then you can just start spinning the command dial, front or rear, and you can see it just kind of goes through all these different, like these are the different sizes of the single point. Now you're up into the zone, a couple different zone sizes, and then you're like everything wide. But I usually use like one size bigger than the smallest single point. Just depends on what you're photographing, but that's what I use most of the time. And that's really about it as far as what I have on my notes. Let's see here. As far as I do really enjoy the flippy screen, because I do like being able to keep that turned around back, so, you know, I'm not scratching up the screen or any chance of it. And because of that, just like on the GH5 I had in the past, I hardly ever use the screen. I might pull it out occasionally, just depending on what I'm doing, like if I'm making a video or something. But I normally don't use it, and the reason I don't is mainly just because of my eyes. You know, the glasses I have, they're not bifocals, so I can only see about maybe 2 feet from the front of my face, you know, very clearly. So I'm trying to look at the rear LCD. I have to hold it far enough away where I can't really see in detail what's on the screen anyway, as far as being able to check sharpness and focus and so on. So I just about always use the EVF, which is a very nice EVF, by the way. And yeah, and you know, just overall, I love the option, or the mode dial here for the movie and stills. So that's nice. That's just like my Nikon Z7 that I'm using now. I have a manual switch where you just switch it from movie and stills, and then the settings are completely different between movies and stills. So that's nice. You keep those separate. You know, again, just like on my Z7. And what I'm usually doing is, actually, I point over here for shutter speed. In the past, this is ISO, obviously. Shutter speed over here. I usually leave it in auto ISO and auto shutter speed and auto on the lens, but of course I'm using the aperture control on the command dial, like I mentioned earlier. And same thing with the exposure compensation. I leave that on C so I can control that with the rear dial. And the only other thing I would like them to do different is to reset the exposure compensation when you turn the camera off. Nikon, Panasonic, I think have that option also. So if you have like +1 on the exposure compensation and you turn the camera off and you turn it back on later, your exposure compensation is zeroed out. So that's just more convenient, so you don't have to worry about did you forget to look at your exposure compensation, make sure it's not like over or underexposed, and you have to start fooling around with it again. Again, a little minor thing, but that would be nice for them to do. This button right here in the front, again, I don't really use function buttons too much, because the only thing I'm really changing when I take pictures, you know, for my style and what I'm doing, I'm really just using exposure compensation on the rear dial and aperture on the front dial. And if I want to turn on Bluetooth, I usually leave Bluetooth and Wi-Fi turned off all the time for battery saving. And I'll just, I have this front button set up for the Bluetooth, so I just press it once and you can see on the screen the Bluetooth on, and press it again, Bluetooth off. And once it's on, then of course you can use the app on your phone, which I'm using the Nikon app here to control the camera for my recording. But once you have Bluetooth on, then you can connect to the camera easily, and if it needs to instigate the Wi-Fi to transfer pictures or remote control, you know, it'll do that on its own too. You don't have to turn on the Wi-Fi manually. That's the other thing I like. The Nikon does that also. So you just have your Bluetooth turned on, connect to it with the app, and if it needs to activate Wi-Fi, it'll turn on itself, and it'll turn it back off when the connection's gone. So that's nice. Yeah, I do like the, you know, of course, the dual card slots are both UHS 2, and SD cards, obviously. There's not really much else to say. You know, I'll just real quick general impressions about the image quality and so on. I do like these new batteries. I usually label them 1 or 2 or 3, depending on how many batteries I have, being $70 a piece. I'm not going to buy more than 2. I don't really need more than 2. It's a little aggravating that it doesn't come with an external charger, because the only way I have to charge it right now, and I'll have to buy maybe a third-party charger, or what I want is one of those Watson battery plates. You can get those plates that just, you know, the battery slides right onto the plate. And I have one of those Watson Duo chargers. It's a dual battery charger. And it just has removable plates, and you buy a $1.50 plate for whatever battery you have, but there's not one for this battery yet. Probably just wait for that, and then it cost me like $3 to get 2 plates, and then I'll have a charger for my camera, so I don't have to charge it through the USB. So there's that. And just overall, this is an outstanding sensor in here. I had the X-T30 in the past, and it was really a great sensor. That's kind of one of the reasons I went ahead and bought the X-T4, and you know that it does have in-body image stabilization, which works really well. So I already knew what the image quality was like. You know, it's got a really good dynamic range, and high ISO is really good. And I don't shoot a lot of high ISO anyway. I normally have my high ISO on the auto ISO topped out at ISO 800 or 400, depending on where I'm shooting. And you know, I could switch it to 1600 or something like that if I'm indoors in museum or whatever. But so image quality is great. I mean, you don't have to worry about that. I do wish they would stop using the X-Trans filter on this, because I don't think it's necessary, just like on the GFX medium format cameras they have and some of their cheaper cameras. I just don't think today it's really necessary, and all it does is bloat the file size, and it makes it, if you're familiar with Adobe Lightroom and Photoshop, Adobe just doesn't handle those X-Trans files as well as something like Capture One, and I'm not going to switch to Capture One because I've been using Adobe forever, so there's really no point in that for me switching. You know, I'm happy with the output from Lightroom for the X-Trans files, but I do wish it was as good as Capture One would give you, and also again I wish Fuji would just stop using the X-Trans filter on there, because I just don't think it's necessary. So really that's about it. You know, it's a really lovely camera. It's a beautiful camera. You know, it's fun to use. It makes really great images, and don't really have any big complaints about it. Obviously, if I did, you know, I wouldn't keep it. And you know, it does come with the cover here for the hot shoe, by the way. And also, just so you know, on this eyepiece, there's little raised areas on the side, and those are latches. You press in on that, so if you don't force this off, so press in and you just lift it off. So you can see right here on the edges of it, you just press in on those, and that'll release it, and you just slide it back on there. So just so you know about that, comes off real easy. Just make sure you press in on the sides. You'll feel where the little button is. I think that's it. I'll stop with that. You know, it's a great camera, and I enjoy it, and probably do some videos later on about video autofocus. And this is just 1.02 firmware again, and you know, if you know Fuji, there's going to be like a version 2, version 3, maybe even version 4. I don't know if there'll be a version 4, but they always update, you know, improve things like autofocus, and sometimes they add features and so on through firmware. Fuji's been well known for that. Nikon actually started getting into that with the Z6 and Z7, which was surprising. Nikon's not really been known for that, but they started doing it, which was really nice. So that's it. Yeah, it's a really nice camera. I wish it was a little bit less expensive compared to some of the competition out there. It's got a lot of competition now. But you know, it's really well built, really high image quality, and still fun to use. All right, well, thanks for watching.